Most schools we speak to have either added pastoral resources in the last 3 years, or they're flagging that they need more. So another counsellor, a new wellbeing lead, extra training for their tutors, etc. And the reason they need more support is that the demand is outpacing their current capacity. So the logical or the most immediate solution is, okay, let's get more resources to deal with that pressure. So if you're a DSL or a pastoral lead, that's not going to be news to you. But what I want to explore in this video is why we think that pattern keeps repeating. Because we don't think it's a resourcing failure, we think it's a design flaw. And that's a really important distinction because one of those problems has a ceiling and the other one doesn't. Let me just start with what's actually happening in the data, because this isn't just an anecdotal video. Referrals to NHS mental health services for children and young people remain nearly 90% above pre-pandemic levels. The average wait after referral runs into the kind of like 100 days, and a significant number of those cases, they close before that support is even ever accessed. National mental health spending has exceeded £12 billion annually, and that's a figure that continues to rise. So we're in a position where, even though the system is investing more, by almost every measure, the demand is still growing. And schools sit inside that same pattern. So they may have new investment or resources coming in, but the pastoral pressure keeps increasing. And the gap between those two things keeps widening, not closing. So here's one of the things that we think is happening. Schools have built pastoral systems that function pretty well once a student is already in distress, but they almost entirely rely on the student reaching a threshold that is visible enough to trigger the referral in the first place. And so it's a whole pastoral model centered on the assumption that the hard part, or the most important part of pastoral care, is the responding part. And so that's where the investment goes in the response infrastructure. So more counsellors, faster referral routes. Okay, let's improve our CPOMS processes or get some stronger links with external services. Let's get a new head of year. And if they can't handle the workload, let's get them an assistant head of year. And none of that is wrong, but it's only half of the system. It's also the half that costs the most and carries the most risk when it's under pressure. The reason for that is because you're working at the sharp end of pastoral cases. Now, the half that's mostly missing is what happens before the referral. So, not the referral itself, what is happening upstream of it. Because for a student to be referred, something has to be visible. So, a behaviour or disclosure or a pattern that's crossed the threshold. And for that to happen, a student usually has to have reached a point where suppression and keeping it all together inside isn't working anymore. And so what they've been carrying around internally has found its way out into something external that an adult can see. Now, by that point, we're not talking about early intervention anymore. We're talking about intervention that's already late, even when it's delivered by really good, really responsive and capable people. The primary problem is what's happening before that visibility point and why it's invisible. Now, there's lots of reasons why students don't disclose. It could be because they don't trust staff. It could be because the culture of the school isn't right. It could be because the referral pathway is unclear. All important things. But such a large proportion of students, particularly adolescents, struggle to identify what they're experiencing emotionally. They might know that something is wrong. They don't always know what. And if you don't know what's wrong, you cannot ask for help with it. The alternative here is that they haven't even noticed that something is wrong or they're numb to it. And we think that is common in today's society because it's so full of distractions. So our attention is so rarely spent examining or being curious about how we're feeling. And this whole part of not understanding how you feel is sometimes described as an emotional vocabulary gap. But I want to be really specific about what that means in practice because it's much more structural than the word gap suggests. So research in what is called affect labeling. So it's the process of attaching precise language to an internal state. It shows that naming an emotion changes how the brain processes it. So it reduces the emotional load rather than kind of amplifying it or turning the volume up. So a student who can say or understand how they're experiencing a feeling is in a measurably different position to one who is carrying an unnamed, hidden, or suppressed feeling. Now, the first student has something to work with. The second is just in it. And the way that pastoral systems are currently built, that second student has to get worse before anything can catch them, because there's nothing in the environment to train that skill, no regular moment or structure where they're given the language or the opportunity to learn and practice it. And practice makes permanent. So if you practice badly, you'll do it badly. And so that's what I mean by a design problem rather than a resourcing problem. Our pastoral systems aren't built to catch students before something becomes visible. They're built to respond once they're visible. And you can keep adding response elements to the infrastructure indefinitely, and it's not going to change that structural gap. You need to build something upstream of it, something that's going to be part of the ordinary environment of a school, not a specialist intervention, not a referral pathway, but just a regular embedded practice that's going to build emotional foundations for your students and eventually help them to help themselves or to seek help earlier. And that phrase, emotional foundations, we use it rather than words like awareness or emotional literacy, because foundations implies something structural, load bearing, solid. You can build on foundations. You don't just experience them. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about equipping students to recognize and name what they're feeling. It isn't therapy or a counseling intervention. It's kind of closer to numeracy or teaching a student to read. That skill of understanding how you feel has to be built through repetition in small increments before it could ever be used under pressure. And the evidence from social and emotional learning research points consistently in one direction. So, coping strategies are significantly less effective when the underpinning knowledge hasn't been established first. So, you can teach a student a breathing technique, let's say, and it may do nothing because in the moment of distress, they don't even know what they're trying to regulate. And so the tool exists, but the foundation that it sits on doesn't. So a student is basically never going to use it. And that isn't a failure of the coping strategy suddenly. It's just a sequencing problem. So step one, it was skipped. It just went straight to step three. So what does step one look like in a real school? It looks less dramatic than most pastoral teams expect, because it isn't a program that requires a new lead or an increased budget line or a completely restructured timetable. It's just simple structure, consistently repeated and embedded in things that already exist in your school day, so tutor time or email sequences or your display boards. It's a repeated structured prompt that gives students the same kind of language on the same schedule, often enough that it stops being a novelty and starts becoming familiar. And none of that comes from adding more specialist resource. It comes from just changing what the ordinary environment of a school is practicing. And that's what we think, that's a shift that we think is worth making, not because it replaces your support that you already have in place, which will always be essential, but because it reduces the unnecessary load on it. So your pastoral team is stretched because nothing upstream is reducing what reaches them. So if you fix the upstream, the downstream will become more manageable. And if you only add to the downstream, you'll just keep adding indefinitely. So most schools are asking, how do we build more capacity to support the students that are in distress, which is a reasonable question. But the question that changes the shape of that problem is, how do we reduce the number of students who reach that acute level of distress? Now, those two questions lead to very different places. One is going to lead to the next person that you have to hire, or the next initiative that you implement, or the next referral pathway that you improve. The other is going to lead into the structure of the system itself, into what we're practicing with students. How often are we doing that? And how early are we doing that? And that is where emotional foundations are built. Yes, they can be built in the counsellor office too. Yes, they can be built by working with the head of year or the head of house, but there's a ceiling to how much support those people can give. Now, if you scale the reach of that high quality emotional learning, then suddenly Tuesday morning tutor time or any time when nothing much seems to be happening, well, now there is something happening. That's all I've got for today. Thanks for watching right to the end.